what I'd like to do now is invite our 4 long-form speakers, Anthony, Michael, Andrew, Tom. The best part about the Tom thing was, I made sure I got the pronunciation of his last name right, and then when I go and completely mess up his first name. Guys, if I could invite you to join me up here on stage for our Q&A. So we've got roving microphones in the room if there are questions from the audience. Otherwise, you're stuck with me and the questions that I came up with as I was furiously banging away, tweeting a few times during the session. But I thought all these presentations were absolutely grand. And before we start, I again invite all of you to give all of our speakers a round of applause for their tremendous presentations today. So believe it or not, I've already got questions that have come from our online audience, so you guys aren't going to be stuck with the stuff that I came up with, but I am going to ask one, just to get it going, and then I'll shut up and it'll be about you guys. And the question I have is this for all 4 of you. Analytics is such a tremendous part of all your businesses. Understanding the consumer, understanding what people are doing. A big challenge that we all face today is when and how does that cross the privacy line? And when and how do we react when we find out that people have misused and abused our data? And I'd like to get your guys' comments on the importance of data and how we get the right behaviors and standards in place so that we actually use the data properly and keep our consumers happy with what we're prepared to share with them. And Anthony, how about if we start with you?
It's a fascinating question. The problem is whenever someone who is in the space talks about it, I think it ends up with a perception that they're misusing that data. But let me start with a general observation that I think our perception of privacy is evolving. And once upon a time, we expected that we would do something and not tell anyone about it. And then the like button came out, and you would have to do an action to explicitly tell somebody about it. And then Facebook brought out Open Graph, or this frictionless sharing. And as you could watch or listen to something, if you use Facebook, you'll often see your ticker filling up with what your friends are listening to on Spotify. The idea is that without having to do anything, you could share. Now, once upon a time, that would have been an anathema. But in the future, actually, we might be quite happy. So the first thing is what we deem to be private or not may evolve. The second thing is you don't want to surprise your users and you don't want them to lose trust in what you're doing. So working within the key things of how you use their own data to help shape the service, what my friends are watching, what I've been watching, these are clearly needed to provide you with personalized recommendations. If you're going to share with friends, clearly you need to know it goes to friends. But how can you shape that so you know that a little while later it doesn't miraculously appear with a targeted advert for you? So disclosure, opt-out, and I guess importantly for some frictionless sharing, opting in. Don't do it without telling the user up front that you're going to do it, and let them decide clearly without 3,000 words of legalese that they want to be part of it or not.
Guys, any other thoughts?
So the only one I'd add, I agree completely around the transparency point. The only one I would add is it needs to be demonstrated to the user or the consumer that it's all about improving their experience. And I think that actually this shift in privacy, I think we're more willing actually to give up data than ever before. In the past, we would have done it through focus groups, etc., get feedback. Now people understand to improve products, we need to sort of, understand what people are doing with a product. We just need to be really clear and demonstrate that it's being used for in the right way, and in the way described transparently.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, a lot of the companies up here, we've been driven, our businesses have grown very virally, and we talk about this notion of democratic advocacy, meaning you can't tell somebody today what constitutes a great service or a great product. People want to feel that they own the discovery aspect of that new service or the new product. And what happens then is that they will go and tell all their friends about it and they'll become an advocate for you. And so you have to build this implicit trust factor in terms of then the two-way street on their engagement with your service, the data that you're creating, that whilst they can advocate you and grow your business tremendously, they can also disadvocate you and kill your business very, very rapidly. And the problem is that the feedback mechanisms and the cycles are so short in changing people's behavior. There's so many choices that people are aware of. Just look at these app stores with 500,000 choices for people to make. That the challenge in these businesses is that you can't react fast enough if you make a mistake. And this is well-intentioned business decisions around data. So I think people just have to be very, very mindful of what the consequences are of abusing or making the wrong decision in the context of data.
Well, I don't want to be left out in answering this question. So,
I was going to say, you're collecting email addresses, for goodness sake, so yeah.
Yes, we're very respectful with them, though. I think the biggest problem that I've always found, both as a user and someone who builds websites, is everyone's confused by what they're sharing and what they're not sharing. I often don't know who's going to see what I'm doing when I do things on websites. And at Bebo, we went through this area where we just got more and more complex. We thought, well, we'll let them control everything, because we'll put control in their hands. And I think Facebook had the same problem. And so they can say, well, I'll share this with my aunt, but I don't want my uncle to see it. And you end up with these ridiculous controls, and then no one's got a bloody clue what they're sharing with anyone. And then in the end, you just got to come up with something very, very simple and say, well, if you use this website, this is who can see it, and that's it. And the more controls you add, actually, the worse the whole situation gets.
Brilliant, thanks. Do I have any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I'm going to take one off the card from one of our streamers. Yes, sir, down in front here. If we can get the microphone and just hang on a second, so make sure everybody hears it.
Hi, my name's Christian Murray. I'm dealing in a second screen environment as well, and I'm wondering if you feel that there's going to be a problem through a transitionary stage. I think everybody in here is well technology informed and are using it. That's why we're here. But I believe also that there are millions and millions of people out there that don't have access to this stuff and are missing out on it. And do you see some way of appropriating and involving those people?
Great question.
Right, so I think one of the interesting things I've found is there are always two audiences. There's the real audience, the punters who'll go out and subscribe to your service or buy your product and so on. And then there's the early adopter. And I think addressing both is very wise. And this is something I tried to do at BBC iPlayer, which is that large numbers of people will use the service, hopefully, for potentially something like simply watching EastEnders. But to build that desire, you can either spend large amounts of money to advertise for them, or you can build the desire amongst an early adopter audience who will then go out and evangelize for you. And so some of the things with iPlayer, with working on connected TVs and Wii's and PS3s and so on, which had actually fairly low usage initially, but drove a huge amount of press that then led to a general, firstly, people thinking the BBC was innovative in it and so on, loving the product, but those people would tell their friends. So I think the answer is, although some of these technologies or products aren't quite mass market yet, they're working either consciously or subconsciously on addressing both of those with a view to taking the early adopters and then transitioning to mainstream.
Got a question I want to take from online, and this one is for you, Tony Tom. I actually love this question, and this references the slide you showed on the angel investing that you presented. The question was this: of those 14 companies that you showed, the question came in from the person saying that there were only 2 of those that actually had British founders. So the question is, why aren't there more? And I did notice on there, Luster was one of the companies that you had, and literally, I think they ran 6 weeks before Fab.com. Oh, was it that long before Fab.com took them right off the market? So is there a perception that wasn't very long?
So taking them off the market implies they closed them down.
They brought them in, and
they became Fab UK.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So
the question is, of the companies that you're finding, why is it that you don't see more UK founders, or is there something in what you're investing in?
No, I think that tech is pretty meritocratic, and I think probably the makeup of founders in London reflects the demographic in London, which is it's really multicultural. So often those businesses are hiring, if they've got non-British founders, they're often hiring Brits to scale, etc. I think from an engineering perspective, it's particularly interesting because it's probably even more skewed outside Britain because we have an amazing pool of talent in Eastern Europe particularly, that we're seeing often relocating. So I think probably it's a pretty fair reflection of the demographics in London.
I actually think that's a very fair comment. And I think, Emmanuel shows it off very, very well. And the fact that you've got great movement within the EU, it's a tremendous opportunity. And I think, as you look all across Europe, this is the place people want to come to do business. I hear that over and over in my tech city role. London is the easiest sell on the planet. People love the city, they want to be a part of it, they feel the buzz. The only city that I see in the world that really compares to the way London has developed from a startup methodology is New York. They are two very, very similar cities.
Just one really quick other thing to add, I think is interesting. You get this other interesting selection bias of, the founders that have come from abroad. It's a bit of a hurdle, actually, to have the commitment, the courage to relocate. So I think you probably get a slight positive selection bias in that as well.
Right, okay, thanks. Another question in the room. I saw some other hands. Yes, sir, you in the front row. If we could just wait for the microphone, that'd be brilliant here. Thanks.
And my question is, I'm going to start off with Tom, but I'd like to hear what the others have to say on it. Thomas Macaulay told us copyright law is a tax on readers for the benefit of writers, a tax that shouldn't last a day longer than necessary. What do? We extend the copyright term repeatedly on both sides of the Atlantic. The US goes from 14 years for the author's rights to plus 70 years. We extend protection retrospectively to dead authors, perhaps in the hope they'll write from the tombs. So how can people innovate and cooperate without the dead hand of copyright owners and other rights holders suing the socks off them, powered by the teams of ambulance-chasing lawyers? And what do you therefore want this coalition government to do to stop this happening, to protect people like yourself from who are coming up with good applications where people can share ideas which should, in any sane society, be in the public domain?
So tough question first, and I don't think I'm best placed to answer it, but I can certainly answer it from the user perspective as well as the sort of digital founder perspective. It's obviously something that whenever you're creating content and you're including UGC, user-generated content, you have to be quite paranoid. I think rightly the requirement is actually to act reasonably. And so we look to create systems that actually self-moderate and enable infringements to bubble up, and then we act quickly if someone sort of points the finger. I'm most excited about the fact that some of the technologies we've heard about today, I think, will actually drag copyright rules with them as huge swathes of consumers adopt them. And I think we saw this even with sites like YouTube, where I think early on the analysis was well over half the content was in breach of some sort of copyright. They've acted at the bleeding edge, but the rest is sort of this ambiguous shade. So my hope is that actually the legislation, we can't expect it to lead consumer behavior and lead technology, but I just hope that legislation will not lag it by much, so that actually the human behaviors are pulling it in the right direction. But these guys are better equipped, I think, than me.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually a related question to it, which was, and Andrew and Michael, maybe you guys could chime in on this. In the US, one of the most successful innovation programs running around right now is Kickstarter, crowdsourced innovation funding. I've personally invested into them, the Pebble Watch, and there's a pad for iPen, the smart iPad pen, these are very, very, very cool initiatives. What do you guys think about that initiative? Is that a model that you think the UK should adopt? But what, more importantly, would you change about that model to make it more successful if you guys...
Before Michael chimes in on that,
yeah,
can I get back to copyright? Because it's a really important question for our company. And I appreciate the sentiment behind the question. But one of the things is, from our vantage point, is we're applying technology to bring new experiences, but it's still anchored on intellectual property. And so if you just take music, for example, the amount of illegal sharing of content that's taken place over the last 10 years has really had a significant impact on the creative artist industry and the origination of the content in the first place. No content, no application of technology, no business. So one of the things actually we're very proud of is, with Shazam, we feel that we've wrapped technology around intellectual property to make it easier for people to access and pay for. And that becomes a self-sustaining business. And it's the same with television, where we completely respect the IP rights holder. These are very large industries that have got significant pressure on their traditional business models, but they're content creators. And so I think it's very important for these young disruptive companies coming into the marketplace to respect the IP rights holder and make sure that there's an equitable compensation, because without the origination of content, there's nothing to build on top of.
Michael.
I'd also like to mention a little bit about patents. You mentioned copyright, but for me, the biggest restricting thing on innovation, certainly in America, is ridiculous patents. People are getting patents passed on technology, which, I mean, once you've come up with the problem, literally take 2 seconds to come up with the answer. And there needs to be some legislation, A, to stop ridiculous patents being issued, and then the problem really happens when they end up in the hands of patent trolls, so they just sell the patent out of the business and it ends up in the hands of some arsehole whose entire job is to sue people. He's got nothing to lose, whereas if another company sues another company, they actually have something to lose because they get countersued. So maybe if you prevent patents from being sold, so that if someone comes up with an idea, it stays with that company, you can't sell the patent out of the company unless it's a sale of the whole company. I think changes in that need to happen. On your point of Kickstarter, I'm a big fan of Kickstarter. I think it's incredibly interesting. The thing that's happening, I think both in the UK and the US in the next year is the idea of crowdsourced funding. So for those of you who know Kickstarter, or don't know Kickstarter rather, it works by people buying effectively the first product. So if I come up with a new idea for a watch, I could sell 10,000 watches before I've even designed the watch, other than a drawing of it. And that initial sales allows the company to set up, fund production of the watch, and then sell it. Well, what's going to start happening with some changes in the law is that you may come up with an idea and say, this is what I want to do, and then people can say, well, I'll invest $50 in that, or $100. So thousands and thousands of micro donations, or investments rather, where they actually get equity in the company, which you don't with Kickstarter, because it's currently illegal. And then that makes it fascinating, because now when I launch, I've got maybe raised a few $1 million from tens of thousands of potentially different people, and they are my initial customers. They're all supporting the idea. They're going to use my service. I think that's a fascinating change that we're going to see literally in the next year happen.
It's already happened.
Yeah.
Seeders and Crowdcube.
I think in America it's not fully legal until the end of this year.
It will be this year. Yeah, we actually...
The first FSA approved crowdsourcer came out this year. My company's on it. It's number 4 on the list.
Okay.
Anthony, you had something you wanted to say there? Real quick?
Yeah, I must say, for any tech company, patents are a serious, serious problem right now. And it's hard to ever say that somebody's intellectual property is not theirs and ought to be taken by somebody else. But I think a survey suggested that an operating system, if you were to make a new operating system, you'd fall foul of 25,000 patents. And it's simply impossible. And I can see that once upon a time, when people worked for ages to create something and needed to do it because the gestation time was years in a laboratory, whatever it might be, and copying it was easy, it made sense. But these days, the things that are being patented take minutes to dream up. There's a fundamental asymmetry between the ease of which a patent is granted and the difficulty in which it's revoked. And the sheer number of these mean that essentially anybody building anything in the space is going to run into so many potential patents, it's impossible to even do the search on it. So it's like everyone's doing 170 miles an hour and one person in 10,000 gets nicked by the police for speeding. It's an odd system, and I think fundamental reform is needed in this area.
There's a question over here.
Hi, sorry, I'm Amy from Magic Silver, and I've got a question from Andrew from Shazam. I think the AI, augmented reality technology at the moment is really exciting, with companies like Leia and British companies like Blipper and Erasma leading the way. From what you showed us, it looked almost like Shazam are kind of entering into that, but in an audio-stimulated manner. I was wondering if in the AR arena, if there is space for both print AR and also audio-stimulated version, or if in fact what you're doing is actually completely different to that.
Okay, that's a very specific question, so I'll try and broaden the answer. So when we think about technology, what we think about really is consumer experience. So it's not applying technology for technology's sake. It's about building something that's really compelling and adds value, and you couldn't actually access that experience through any other means without using the technology. So augmented reality, I think, is tremendous. If you look at a lot of the innovation that's coming with very well-known companies like Google and Nokia, etc., where you can walk down the street and instantaneously see all the restaurant menus in your eye line, etc. Those are very compelling experiences, but there's a right time, I think, to really get behind that if you're not in the startup phase. And for us, it's not about deploying technology for technology's sake. It's about looking at the trends in terms of when does this get to critical mass in the marketplace where there's enough people using it that there's a real revenue opportunity, and is the service compelling enough that people aren't just going to see it as novelty, that it provides real utility in their everyday lives. And again, there's a real sustainable business to be built behind it. So that's how we think about new emerging technologies like augmented reality. But we're totally dependent. Look, we've been there. We had to invent our own technology on day one. We were a startup because it didn't exist at the time. We now have a large audience that we can bring new services to, and so we're thinking about a different stage in the life cycle as to when we would introduce AR, for example.
I hope, too, that answer works out for one of our viewers in the Channel Islands who asked almost that very same question on how much technology should be startups implementing. And really, it's down to the minimum amount to deliver the experience that you need out of the gate. You don't want to be cranking the wheels too much on technology. It's all about getting that experience out there. And I think, to the point you brought up much earlier, Michael, iterating, and pounding it as much as you possibly can. We will probably have time for one more question. So, you, sir, you have the microphone.
Thank you. Kieran Quinn with Delta Trade, Director of Olympics and Strategic Business. We work with rights holders on 5 continents right now, and I'm curious, as digital innovators, what you have seen which has surprised, pleased, or even displeased you for the Digital Olympics right now?
Everybody's smiling.
Yeah. Well, so we can talk from our experience of both the Super Bowl and the Olympics with the IOC, etc. I mean, the challenge for a small company is that we don't have the internal departments to really go in and negotiate the rights. So our approach has been to find a business partner who already has secured those rights and can actually give us access to build an experience on top. And the tricky part is whether they've given away the digital component of those rights, so a third party can't come in and work with them who may be slightly more innovative, entrepreneurial, etc. So we're not working on 4-year lead cycles. We might be working on 3-month lead cycles, and by that stage, everything's kind of taken care of, everyone's got a place, and yet we're saying that we could build a really compelling experience, and we can get a lot of people actually using this in a very, very short window of time. So the challenge for us in rights is we absolutely want licensed services. We have to have licensed services, it's non-negotiable. But secondly, the challenge for us is that we can't necessarily be the lead business that's going to be negotiating those rights up front. We're going to have to piggyback on somebody else who's secured the rights and can give us those rights.
What has displeased us is the fact that you're trying to offer consumers an Olympic proposition, but you can't mention the word Olympic. And, in order to do any mail shot to people or tweet from our editorial team, we have a lawyer sitting by to go, is this okay? And after sending out our mail shot saying you could watch a range of things with Z-Box, someone wrote to us and said, congratulations, I think you're doing something around the Olympics, but you've carefully managed to not mention London 2012 or the Olympics, so you're leaving me to work out what it is you're doing. So, yes, so some more flexibility to actually talk about the proposition you're doing would be very useful.
Two quick ones from me. Was it pleased or displeased? Okay, pleased. I always err on the side of pleased. So 2 things I've been impressed by. One is the lack of downtime, and the infrastructure has been phenomenally robust. I don't want to jinx it, but from what I've seen so far, which has truly been inspiring. And the second thing is actually the humanization of the athletes themselves through things like Twitter. Like, I think for the first time probably in human history, the global population feels like they're getting to know these people. They're learning their diets, they're learning their intonation, the way they speak, and then this is actually proliferating cross-platform. So you watch the BBC footage and it now includes tweets for the first time that I've really seen. So it's been really exciting.
Michael, any thoughts?
I've purely been a consumer of the Olympics, and I think it's been absolutely lovely.
And I think I would say, representing Reuters, we've had a fabulous experience working with Locog again. Jerry and team were phenomenal. Basically, they gave us the inspiration saying, you do have access to all this data, you can go and build something as a news provider. So that's been tremendous, and so a big thanks to Jerry and Tiffany McRae over there for actually getting the whole thing put together for us. I think too, the robustness of the networks has been tremendous. Really, really well done. we too had to breathe a sigh of relief when we found out we could actually use the word Olympics in our application. So a little flexibility would be nice there. But great question.
Sorry, I should say in general, we're very pleased. It's fantastic games that we're having in the summer of sport, and the information that we can create and that's available is brilliant.
Very good.
So part of my job as the moderator is to make sure that we end on time. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for tremendous presentations. You guys were the rock stars again today, and great hair, even you, Andrew. I like your hair, it looks good. So if we could give a round of applause to our presenters. I'd like to also thank Thomas Hegarty and Emmanuel Caro for their presentations as representing the SME community here as well today. Very good job to you guys. If I were to try to wrap up and summarize, I guess, what I heard, and I was banging away on Evernote with lots of questions and things as I thought about this session, it really comes down to this, I think, in what you heard today, and what the secret is that is driving innovation in Tech City, in the UK, and all across the world. And it boils down to this. We're all connected. We all want to engage. And whether we realize it or not, back to Tom's point, talking about the hierarchy of needs, we're all striving to be a part of perhaps the greatest revolution any of us will live through in our lives, driven by the underlying power of mobile and digital technologies, coupled with our natural behavioral desire to share, to communicate, sometimes to pontificate, to extol, to pan, to make our feelings known, and to take part in that human desire to engage, connect, and communicate. The most important thing I'd leave you with any of this is the following. Every time we build a product, everything we want to do, if I were to ask any of you to tell me about your 5 favorite products on your device, it wouldn't matter what the answer was. You'd tell me what they were, their Facebook, Sky Sports, Olympics apps, whatever it happens to be. But I guarantee you, every single one of you will do one thing when you talk about your favorite products. You'll smile. And that's because the digital products that we create today are building incredible emotional responses from us as human beings. And I think that's the big thing that the Dash Tech industry in Britain is bringing to the world. So this afternoon, during lunch, we're going to have speeches from 2 people. First, from the business secretary, Dr. Vince Cable, and Joanna Shields of Facebook. Those will begin in the garden at 1:30 p.m. This will then be followed by lunch and networking. Our afternoon sessions begin at 3 p.m. And the 3 sessions that we have, you can see up on the wall here, showing the rooms as well. Smart infrastructure in the digital economy, augmented reality and video imaging, and next generation mobility. I hope you enjoyed today's session. Feedback is always welcome on this. Take part, network, connect with people. There's a tremendous reception towards the end of the day as well. I hope you can take part in it. And again, my thanks to our audience, to the people viewing online, and to our panelists. Great session, everyone.